Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session on EPC compliance with the new minimum energy efficiency standards, and particularly what landlords should practically be doing in the next 12 months. So this is only a short session just to sort of bring you up to date and really hone down on some examples. So I'm Luke Loveridge. I'm a strategic advisor at Eco Approach. And Eco Approach are a national award-winning leader in property certification, servicing, and retrofit. We deliver hundreds of retrofits per week, from analysis all the way through to installation, and we visit over 10,000 properties per month. And this is really crucial for what I'm going to be talking about in the rest of these slides, because we actually use a lot of our own data to calculate this, because we've got quite a lot of it, but then we triangulate that and verify it with national data too. So I really just want to firstly recap on the rules, what's been confirmed. So the Warm Homes Plan was published in January 2026 this year, and confirmed a number of things, such as the deadline will be the 1st of October 2030. Costs towards the cap will be counted from the 1st of October 2025, which is a good thing. It gives more certainty for landlords to actually commit to spending and complying. There's a grandfathering rule for EPCs. So if your property is compliant under the current SAP methodology of energy performance certificates by October 2029, then that's considered to meet the requirement for this regulation. The cap was confirmed at £10,000 per property. So that is up from the previous MEES regulations of £3,500. But they were considering £15,000, so it's actually not as bad as it could be. And there's also low value and solid wall exemptions as well. So if your property is below £100,000, it will be 10%. The cap will be 10% of that £100,000. So if it was £90,000, it would be a £9,000 cap. And the solid wall exemption means that the landlord can choose not to do solid wall insulation. And I thought I'd just touch upon the change of government or change of leadership within the government and the new energy minister, so Miata Fahnbulleh. She was actually the former chief executive of the New Economics Foundation, and they've done a lot of work on feeding into the Warm Homes Plan, so there's a background there. And her views on energy efficiency are very much through a social lens, so how can you reduce the cost of living, increase the conditions the quality of the conditions that tenants are living in, to basically reduce inequalities. And she's repeatedly reaffirmed that 2030 deadline of EPCC and resisted calls for delays. So the key takeaway here is you shouldn't really be expecting any regulatory U-turns over the course of this regulation. So just some key considerations for landlords, not just in the next 12 months, but more generally on this. So we went over two key points, so the cost counted from October 2025 and the grandfathering rule. Another very key point is that the home energy model will be replacing the standard assessment process methodology for EPCs. So that's within about 12 months, they'll be looking to change that over, so H2 2027. I'll be going into a bit more detail on the home energy model and SAP in the next couple of slides, just to give you a bit of context. Other considerations are sort of tenancy void. So when could the landlord actually do the work? So just understanding if there's more disruptive works, understanding when the tenancies come to an end, or might be an opportunity to do it, like say the tenants are on holiday or something. We speak to a number of landlords from all different types, portfolio all the way through to people that just have one property, and they all want to try and get compliant for the least amount of cost, but also least disruptive, and that does tie into the sort of tenancy void piece as well. Another important consideration is actually the Renters' Right Act. It's made it much more strict in terms of arbitrarily increasing rents. So actually, the minimum energy efficiency standards does provide some evidence there that you've done some work to it, and then you could potentially increase rents further based on that. So that's something just to consider. And also the risk appetite. So if you're a portfolio landlord with a number of properties within scope of this regulation, potentially an investment bill of thousands or tens of thousands of pounds, you will have probably a different risk appetite than maybe a smaller landlord with maybe 1 or 2 properties that might only need to spend maybe £1,000 or less than £1,000 on each to get it compliant. Now, just to go down into the home energy model. So it is more granular than the current SAP assessment. So it base itself on half-hourly assessments rather than 12 monthly averages. So it's a lot more detailed and should be more accurate in terms of understanding the real energy efficiency of a property. But that will mean assessors will need more time on site. So it will likely be more expensive. How much so, we won't understand until it rolls it out and assessors start doing it. It could be significant though, depending on how many more data points that need to be collected. And the home energy model is also less forgiving of default inputs as well. With SAP, you can potentially have some assumptions, whereas the home energy model, it's more based on real data, or it wants a lot more data in order to input into the model. On the other hand, it does reward smart technology, so heat pumps, solar PV, batteries, etc., and properties with good orientation to the sun as well. So if that fits your property, then that's a good thing. If it doesn't, then that could actually potentially go against the property. So that's just something to consider there. So just on the next few slides, I'm going to go through some examples and also what compliance generally looks like across the country at the moment at a high level. But there's an assumption that I'm going with at the moment, which is that the standard assessment process it's more known, and it's probably safer to get compliant under that rather than under the home energy model, which will probably not be less strict than the SAP model, and actually might and on the property spit out potentially lower grades that scores than what it would normally be under SAP. So what does compliance currently look like based on sort of the SAP data that we've got? So actually 33% of properties could get compliant for less than £1,500. So that's like a positive news story. A lot of landlords we talk to fare like that, just 10 grand cap is quite a lot. But actually the majority only need some light works like loft insulation, maybe in combination with maybe some smart thermostat, smart radiator valves, those sorts of things. The average cost is less than £5,500. So that's probably going to feature quite heavily in terms of solar panels, maybe again combined with some other light works like loft insulation, LED lighting, those sorts of things. But again, that's significantly less than that £10,000 cap. I think the more challenging group will be that 20% of properties that will either get close to or exceed that cap. So they will either meet the C regulations very close to £10,000, they will need some extensive work, or they actually won't comply and will need to get an exemption registered. I think there is a bit of a blind spot actually with between 20 and 25% of rental properties that are already actually a C, but they're within 5 SAP points. And if something's happened since that assessment's taken place, maybe they've got an extension, or maybe it's just an old assessment, so new versions of SAP might actually just slightly change some of those SAP points going towards the certificate. That could potentially slip you down from a C to maybe a high D, for example, and bring you within scope of the regulations then. So that's just something to watch out for. So let's go through some specific examples. So speaking of that sort of Cs, which are quite low, if I was the landlord, I would be looking at how old the EPC is. Will it expire before 2029, and have any works been carried out since that assessment's taken place? And depending on that, I would probably get reassessed under the current SAP methodology of the energy certificate, performance certificates. And especially if it expires before October 2029, if it's old, so maybe over 5 years old, or there have been works done to the property. So if it's maybe just a very recent EPC, like a few months or a year or two old, then you might want to wait because it's valid for 10 years. But if it falls into one of these categories, it'd probably be worth getting reassessed. Then there's that group of properties which would cost less than £1,500 to get compliant. So usually about a high D within 5 points or so. Again, light works like loft insulation, LEDs, smart thermostats, those sorts of things. So typically less disruptive as well. So with those, again, I would probably get reassessed under the current methodology. And because it's likely to be less than £1,500, probably get the works done and dusted out the way, and so that you are then compliant under the SAP methodology for about 10 years. So 10 years. Then there's sort of probably the biggest chunk of properties, so the sort of low Ds, high Es. So again, typically around £5,500, and that will include things like solar, maybe solar plus loft insulation, and or some other light works. And again, getting assessed over the next 12 months probably would be wise. And if I was the landlord, if there's some good financing offers, any grants available, or maybe I was a portfolio landlord and I just wanted to de-risk it, so just to get it done and out of the way, I would probably then get the works done as well. If you were paying out of savings or capital and you just wanted to wait, there could be an argument to wait until the HEM model. But I think the majority of these would probably be better getting assessed under SAP, particularly if the orientation of your property isn't as conducive to solar as it would normally be. So, and then I think the challenging and sort of the exception is these low E to G rated properties likely to be spending it up to the cost cap of around £10,000, and even some of those won't even get to a C with that spend, because it would potentially involve extensive fabric renovations, solar, but maybe quite a large solar system, PV system. Potentially replacing the heating system as well. So this is actually generally they could potentially wait until the home energy model rolls out, because it probably won't make any difference, because it probably won't get any cheaper, put it that way. Again, if you're a portfolio landlord, there might be an argument to wanting to act now in order to de-risk, because obviously closer to the time scales, it will be harder to get tradespeople, the costs will go up, etc. But there is potentially this group will be less likely to engage earlier on than some of the other groups. So key takeaways from this is SAP is a known quantity, whereas the home energy model, the assessment itself will likely be more expensive. Depending on your property, it might be better. It probably won't be necessarily better than some of the SAP methodologies. And it could potentially be worse, and you have to actually spend more money to get compliant. So because of that, I would say most properties could actually benefit from getting at least reassessed in the next 12 months. And particularly those who are a low C, because they're probably not aware of this regulation coming or not as aware, just because they know they're a C, so they probably don't realise they could be in scope. Whereas if a reassessment could potentially downgrade that from a C to a D. And then if you've got low to medium cost works, again, probably worth complying. And if you're a portfolio landlord with a lower risk appetite, that argument sort of stacks up even more to comply earlier rather than later. But then if you are hitting the cost cap, then there is an argument to wait there unless you want to de-risk. So just in terms of a checklist for, firstly, that first point is for lenders and anyone who works with landlords. It's really, we need to raise awareness over the next 12 months, particularly of those landlords who might have a C, but could be downgraded to a D depending on how old their EPC is. And then for landlords, they really need to review whether a reassessment is needed or not, depending on their circumstances, understand their risk appetite and whether they want to comply earlier rather than later, if that's appropriate or not. Understanding timing, so when will work actually be done, particularly if it's more involved work. Looking and reviewing it, finance options. So there are a number available. We've launched one, or should I say nationwide have launched one with our support for landlords, about 2.99%, and comes with a free MEES assessment. to get compliant. So that's market leading. But there are also others out there, further advances. A number of lenders offer sort of energy efficiency or green further advances on your lending. And the Warm Homes Plan is launching some more home loan offers from the autumn 2026 as well. And then understanding the impact on rent. So how much do you actually need to increase the rent to potentially cover that cost, or at least the financing cost? Bearing in mind some of the works could potentially increase the value of the property as well. And that's it. Thank you very much.